minutes for the audience to join, and then we can start the session.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Yes, ma'am. So we'll start the session.
Okay.
Uh, Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone. Before we start our session today, I would like to express my gratitude to all of you for joining us today. Yesterday, we celebrated National Bird Day, and to remark its significance, we are hosting a live session today on migratory birds of wetlands. My name is Shruti Suresh, and I'm a wildlife conservationist and environmentalist. I'm also a devoted social media manager at Sustaina Greens LLP. Also in the audience, we have Dr. Meenakshi Singh, who is the founder and managing director of Sustaina Greens LLP, which is none other than a consultancy firm that offers innovative solutions for a sustainable future. In today's live session, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Chandni Valodkar. Dr. Chandni is an experienced researcher and an academician with a PhD in zoology from the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda with more than 9 years of research experience. She is also assistant professor in zoology at the same university. Dr. Chandni was an ex-research associate at Safis EI DuPont India Private Limited Savli, and she has a vast understanding in ecology, avian biology, and wildlife biology. Dr. Chandni is also a passionate and devoted wildlife enthusiast and conservationist. She is assisting and overseeing various research projects which are involving the understanding of leopard ecology, freshwater ecology, hydrology, biodiversity, and insect toxicology. She is also a committee member for the Society for Ecological Restoration Asia chapter and a life member at Society for Reproductive Biology and Comparative Endocrinology and Association of Zoologists. I assure all the viewers that you will receive innovative insights and thought-provoking conversations in the next 30 to 40 minutes of these sessions. So let's everyone let's welcome our distinguished guest, a true champion of environment and its biodiversity, Dr. Chandni Valodkar. Hello, ma'am. A very warm welcome to you and also our viewers. Would you like to say anything, ma'am, before we start our session today?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Chandni Valodkar. I would like to thank Sustaina Greens LLP and specifically Meenakshi ma'am and the whole team of Sustaina Greens who has thought of, having me on their forum today. So it's a very important aspect of animal conservation, that is migratory birds and how wetlands play a role in their protection and conservation. So yeah, pretty excited to be here today.
Same here, ma'am. The feeling is mutual. So let's start with this session. Perfect. So that we get with the fundamentals of what we are going to be talking about today. And for everyone who is unfamiliar with today's topic, also they'll get a lot of insights. So, ma'am, I'll just start with the question session. The very first question I'm going to ask you is, what are migratory birds and how do they navigate their long distance journey to and from wetlands?
Yeah. So there are different migratory birds who actually go on for hundreds and thousands of kilometers each year to their migratory regions, and in order to have a favorable condition of breeding, raising their young, and even feeding, right? So there are more than 4,000 species of migratory birds that are known till date, and majority of these birds either migrate from the north, that is from the northern hemisphere to the southern parts, to their southern wintering grounds, or vice versa, like from the southern part to the northern wintering grounds. They also might, some species also migrate horizontally. Some of the species are altitudinal migrants, right? So they migrate at a, say for example, moving up from the mountain into the lowlands. So during winter they come down because of the high, I mean, very cold temperatures in the up in the mountains, so they come down and reside in the lowlands, right? So there are different species that have different preferences. So, for example, there are small species which migrate at night, and some of them feed by the day. Right. Now, there are a few species which also are waterfowls or waders who migrate during the daytime as well. So they use both the times of the day, either night or day, depending on the species. Right. So it's a very exhausting and arduous journey of migrating from one place to another for such long distances. For example, I'll give you an example of a bird called as red knot. Okay, it's a 220 grams of bird. I mean, the weight is 200 grams approximately, and it almost loses half of its body weight once the migration is over. Right, it loses half of its body weight. You can imagine the kind of physiological um, energy that they use for migrating from this particular breeding ground to their wintering grounds or vice versa. Uh, if you look into the migration of how that happens, so they use the Earth's landmarks. So they also use the Earth's magnetic field, okay, and they orient themselves according to the Earth's magnetic field. Also, they use landmarks like rivers. Some of the species, fly parallelly to through the coastline. They use sun as a magnetic compass, and they also use stars as their navigational cues. So there are various orientation and navigational cues that they use for migration from one place to another each year. So every year they go from one place to another through the same route, right? Some of these species are known to use the same routes, right? So these are the cues that they follow, right? So
Okay.
it's a very amazing science behind it, and to learn about it, it's a very intriguing and interesting.
Interesting. Yes, ma'am. Surely, ma'am, the way you have answered this, I'm pretty sure that all are interested to know about this and how they use these geospatial cues or the magnetic field or traveling from northern to southern hemisphere. So this was something really insightful, ma'am, and informative to know about. So I'll quickly go to the next question, ma'am. That is, can you name some of the migratory species and their distinct migratory patterns?
Yeah. So there are many types of bird migration. When we talk about migration specifically, there are short distance migration, there are long distance migration, there are long distance migration, there are short distance migration, and there are medium distance migration.
Oh, hello, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I think there was a network connectivity issue. Yes, ma'am, you are audible now.
Yeah,
Okay, ma'am.
yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so some of them are migrating for very long distances, some of them migrate for shorter distances, some of them migrate for days together,
Okay,
right? And some of them migrate for a short span of days, right? For example, I'll give you an example of bar-tailed godwits. Bar-tailed godwits are flying non-stop for 11,000 kilometers, right, for 9 days straight. So they migrate from Alaska to New Zealand, okay, for in
okay,
a short span of 9 days. There are some species which migrate for I mean, they migrate leisurely, so they migrate for 50 to 60 days, right? With taking their own time, right? So there are some species of warblers who actually migrate for from Central America to northern Canada as well, right? The most important, or rather, the most significant species that I find in terms of migration is the Arctic tern. You might have heard about them, right?
yes,
They are also called as the global spanners of all, right? So they breed in the north of the Arctic, which is the North Pole, and they migrate to the southern wintering grounds in Antarctic. So you can imagine a species goes from the North Pole up to the South Pole, right? Taking a very arduous journey, okay, of migrating from Arctic to Antarctic during this winter season, right? So they take a circuitous route of migration spanning continents like Europe. They move from, Africa, Europe, almost a journey of 11,000 miles. So you can imagine the kind of energy these birds put in. And if we talk about the Indian species, um, we have many species which come to the country each year, right? For example, the Grela geese, if we talk about the geese family, there are many ducks that come to the country every year. For example, the northern pintail, we also have Gadwal, we have Eurasian pigeon, we also have the Amur falcon, which is very, very famous now.
Yes.
Uh, we also have the black-tailed godwit and many other waders which come to the country each year and migrate to this country. So yeah, that way our country is very fortunate to witness these species every year.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering that question. It was really informative to know about the migratory species and how their migratory patterns are completely distinct from one another. So I'll go to the next question, ma'am. That is, do migratory birds use wetlands year round, and do they face challenges during migration to wetlands?
Yes. So basically, wetlands are the most productive habitats that you find on the globe, right? They are transitional zones between aquatic ecosystems and terrestrial ecosystems. And almost 40% of our biodiversity, total biodiversity, is supported by these wetlands. So the relation of usage of these wetlands is basically shaped by many factors. For example, the availability, the depth of water, the food, shelter, right? Presence or absence of predators, right? So each bird species has a different purpose of using a wetland. Say, for example, if they are using a wetland for breeding, right? So such species are also there. Then you also find species which are dependent on these wetlands for only for seasonal, dependency. For example, they come to wetlands only for a particular season, right? Like the migratory birds in India, which come from the northern hemisphere, that is from Europe and Russia, right? So they come here for food and life support and the survival. So there is a host of different factors, and that's how the species. I mean, it depends on species to species of how they are using the wetland, and also the seasonal changes, the fluctuations. What kind of purpose do they have in coming to a wetland, right? So it really depends. But yeah, some species come during a part of the year, and some species come to the wetlands for a different part of the year with a different purpose. So it really depends, yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you,
And if you
ma'am,
talk
for.
about, yeah,
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You could say.
yeah. So the challenges that we face. For example,
Yes,
if
ma'am.
you talk about the challenges, so there are a lot of challenges if we talk about the bird migration, right? So many birds, while migrating, they get exhausted because they have a
Yes.
certain reserves, right? The energy reserves that they have
Yes, ma'am.
during the migration. Okay, so just before migration, they will, hoard all the fat reserves. Okay, and then they start their journey. Okay,
Hmm.
now,
Yes, ma'am.
so that is one aspect that it's very exhausting, right? Some birds also starve and die during this process of migration. So it really depends of the fitness on the fitness of the bird. Then they also some of them also lose direction, right? So it might happen that they might, get separated from the flock and then they lose direction of where they were going, right? Some use up the energy reserves, then they do not have any energy reserves left. So there are a lot of challenges. Also, if we talk about the cues on the earth that we talked about a while ago, right? So what happens is because of changes on the land surface of the earth, they might lose their orientation as well because of any kind of landmass changes, right? So
Okay.
there are a lot of changes that are dependent on the species. Okay. Also, there are physiological challenges, right? So it's a whole lot of neuroendocrine mechanism of how migration actually occurs. If you look into the physiology part of the bird, right? So metabolically, it is of course yes very taxing for them, right? But there are other aspects like the hormonal mechanisms and everything, which I am not going to go into detail. But yes, there are a lot of other things that pose as a some major aspects of migration if we talk about the challenges that they face.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, since in the answer you specified that some birds they starve during the process of migration, and what leads that for them to starve? Like, what is it? Some sort of an instinct or a behavior pattern that they have?
No. Basically, what happens is they hoard the fat reserves, like I said, before
Hmm.
going for migration, right?
Okay.
So while the journey is on, they use up these fat reserves as energy, and that's how
Okay.
they starve. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
So
Okay.
starvation is one of the aspects. Even dehydration is one. If they don't
Dehydration.
find water, right? So
Okay,
these are
ma'am.
the challenges that they face.
Thank you, ma'am, for providing the insight on this question and how that climatic elements and also the physiographic division of the India that also plays a lot of role in the abundance of the migratory birds that we find in our country. So I'll go to the next question, ma'am. That is, what type of wetlands are mostly used by these species, and can you name some of the wetlands in India and Gujarat where we could find migratory birds?
Yeah. So, if you look into the types of wetland that our country has, we have a total wetland area of almost 5.12%, right? So, 5%, more than 5% of our country's geographical area is wetland, right? So, this
Yes,
comes to around 3.6 million um, I think hectares of wetland, right? And now there are different types. For example, there are coastal wetlands, there are inland wetlands, right? And again, there are natural wetlands, there are man-made ones as well, right? So coastal
yes,
wetlands, if you have heard about estuaries, we have intertidal mud flats, right? We have
yes,
mangroves, right? That comes under coastal wetland. Inland wetlands are the ones which are freshwater wetlands. For example, we have rivers, right? We have ponds, we have reservoirs,
lakes.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
So these are inland wetlands. Again, there are natural and man-made. Some which have occurred, naturally. Some which are actually man-made. So man-made wetlands are the ones which are created by humans for their own purposes, and these birds use these wetlands as their migratory sites. Right? So there are irrigation tanks, there are village ponds. We have a lot of village ponds in Gujarat. If you move across the rural landscape, right, a lot of village ponds that you find.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
different types. Okay, and if you look into the country's geographical position, right, like I said, we are on the Central Asian flyway, which is used by these migratory birds, right? So
Yes, ma'am.
if you look into this was the Indian scenario, but if you look into the our state of Gujarat, right, Gujarat has 7.6% of the total wetlands in the country. So you can imagine that there is more than 7% of wetlands of the country are in Gujarat. And the highest is found, of course, in Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, right? Almost more than
Yes,
11%. But Gujarat tops in the total wetland area in the country, which is almost 22% of the country's geographical landmark, right? So this is followed by Andhra Pradesh and Maharashtra as well, right? So if you look into the whole landscape, geographical landscape, we are as a state and as a country as well, we are very rich in terms of the wetlands that we have. And
yes,
majority of the chunk that we find in Gujarat, okay, that is intertidal mud flats, which made the major chunk of wetlands that you find in Gujarat, right? So wetlands actually function as a lot of um, uh, a lot of things that wetlands provide us, right? For example, they provide us resources. They also give us regulating services. They also give cultural services, right? In fact, if you look into the whole landscape and you study the landscape of the country, you can see that wetlands help in reducing or reduction of flooding. Okay, and
yes,
they also
yes,
act as carbon sinks. A very, very important aspect to wetlands is they act as carbon sinks
common sense.
of the
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. You can imagine the kind of services or the kind of um, role that they play, such an important and significant role in the whole ecosystem if you look as a whole, right? Now, if we talk about the Indian wetlands, there are a lot many wetlands, and some of them are very very famous for the number of migratory birds that they have every year. You might have heard about Chilika Lake,
Yes, ma'am.
Loktak Lake,
Yes,
right? Pichavaram wetlands, again, a very, very significant place, right? If you go towards the northeast, there's Somurari, right? If you come towards the south, we have Koleru, right? In the west, we have many, I'll be talking about the Gujarat ones as well,
yes,
right?
ma'am.
The Sambar Lake. We also have Sundarbans, which is the largest, one of the largest wetlands, if you talk about India.
Yes, ma'am.
Gujarat, if you come to Gujarat, Gujarat has again a lot of wetlands which are really famous. Okay, now number one is whenever we talk about wetlands, it comes as the one name that comes to mind is Nal Sarovar, right? We also have the Greater Run and the Little Run of Kutch, which has
Yes,
so many species coming over every year, right? So also because of the Greater Flamingo, it has become really famous. Then we have Thol and Vadvana, even Charidand and Khijadia, which are found in Gujarat, right?
yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for providing a detailed, information about the wetlands and how they play a very crucial role in sustaining the abundances of the migratory species. I'll ask the next question, ma'am. That is, I think all of the bird lovers or the people who love to watch birds, they would really looking forward to this question. That is, when is the best time to witness or watch these elusive migratory birds?
Yes. So when we talk about our country specifically, the wetland, I mean, sorry, migratory birds start migration, way early, and they come here by October, right? So by November, December, we have most of them migrating to the country. And the best time, I would say, or the peak season, I would say, for watching migratory birds in their full glory would be January and February. That is the best time because that is peak winter and majority of the birds have arrived till then, right? So by
Okay,
October they start coming, and by January February they peak in the numbers. So the
okay,
best
ma'am.
time is January and February.
So, ma'am, you're saying that now it is the best time to go for a nice bird watching
Yeah,
session. Okay,
definitely.
ma'am. So, before I jump to our next question, just a quick note to the audience. For those of you who have multiple questions, please make sure to write them down below in the comment section because we will do our best to address them in the last 20 minutes of this session. So I hope the audience you can put down your questions in the comment box below. So I'll go to the next question, ma'am. That is, do migratory birds have a specific breeding grounds in wetlands, or do they use wetlands primarily as stopover sites?
Yes. So all water birds use wetlands, right? Many
Yes,
of them use them as feeding sites. Many of them use as breeding sites, right? Some of them also use them as the roosting sites, right, where they can stay over, right? So, for example, Sarus crane, you might have heard about
yes,
this bird, right?
yes,
So
ma'am.
they use wetlands and they prefer areas which are nearby these wetlands, right? So there are many determining factors why these birds prefer wetlands. For example, physical, if you look into the physical factors, then there comes the water depth, that is the depth of the water body. There is water temperature that is also playing a role. Then the soil quality, water chemistry, right? All these are physical aspects. If you look into the biological aspects, the biological aspects is majorly forming the vegetation and the fauna on what they feed on, right? So there are some species which feed on specific vegetation or specific plant species, right? And there are
Yes, ma'am.
some which prefer smaller vertebrates and invertebrates, right? So there are many factors that push the birds in using the wetlands because wetlands provide a unique ecosystem to them, and the habitat is also favorable for them. So all these aspects of physical and biological aspects come into picture when we talk about the use of wetlands by migratory birds.
Okay. Thank
And
you, ma'am,
some
for
use
answering
them as
this. Yes, ma'am.
okay, yeah, the
Yes, ma'am,
stopover
you could
sites
say.
one.
Yes, yes.
So some use them as stopover sites to either rest or to feed. Now, like I said, that birds while migrating use a lot of their fat reserve or their fuel, right,
Hmm.
to energize this migration. So it might happen that while on the way, right, they might lose these fat reserve. So to refuel their bodies, right, they use these stopover sites for feeding and again filling their or fueling their bodies, just like we stop on a highway to fill fuel in our
Hmm.
tanks, right?
Yes.
So similarly here as well, they use these stopover sites to refuel their or to re-energize their bodies, because it's a very very physiologically um, difficult journey to get into migration, right? So
Hmm.
refueling, right? So they should be metabolically ready for flying for such longer distances, right?
Yes.
So they will, have more fat deposits, right? And elevated body mass, right, before starting their migratory journey again.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering this question as well. That how they use the wetlands also for breeding, roosting, and stopover sites. It's not like it is inclined to one aspect. So, ma'am, we'll go to the next question. That is, how do changes in wetland ecosystems, such as habitat loss or pollution that we are seeing today, and that impacts the migratory bird population?
Yes. So there are a lot many factors that come into picture when we talk about the impact of pollution, right? Like for example, I would say waste dumping. If you talk about urban wetlands specifically, right? So waste dumping, we have a lot many encroachment nowadays, right? Construction activities, right? So water pollution is another aspect, okay, which changes the water quality that is required for these birds to have, their preferred food in these habitats, right? So whatever is going to alter these habitats is going to impact these migratory birds straight away, right?
Okay.
And these are some of the human induced activities, right? Anthropogenic ones. I would say here, and which actually, are deteriorating these habitats and ultimately, impacting these birds coming to these specific places. Now, there are a lot of reports that we find today of poaching, right? Many people in surrounding areas, say for example, in specifically in rural areas, right? These birds are poached, okay, either for their meat or their eggs. Okay, there is also a very very important aspect when it comes to the migratory birds. Their nuisance, I would say, is the presence of feral dogs. Okay, so even these species which are feral animals, okay, also hunt on these birds as their food, right? So again, it's a very very important aspect to be looked into when we talk about protection and conservation of these birds nearby wetlands. Also agriculture, a lot of these habitats are modified, uh, you know or altered for agricultural activities,
Agricultural
right?
purposes.
To
Yes, ma'am.
use water for irrigation, right, etc. So these directly impact, these migratory birds. Either they stop coming or they stop using these wetlands, and they have to then find alternative sources of reservoirs, right, nearby. So, say for example, I will give you a few examples. The smog pollution recently, which is going on in Delhi and Noida.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, ma'am.
there are two sanctuaries, Surajpur and Okhla, where there are very less birds coming to these places now. So previously there used to be a lot many species that used to migrate to these places, but because of smog pollution, all the smoke and everything, right, the air quality has deteriorated, and ultimately the birds have stopped coming to these places, right? Then we also talk about the Greater Run of Kutch, the Flamingo City, which is again a very very famous um, spot for the flamingos, right? So again, due to various aspects, the flamingos now have stopped coming to these places, right? So not only the wetlands, I would say here that even the catchment areas, the surrounding catchment, is a very, very important aspect of any water body, right? So even the catchments should be protected. I would also like to, mention here that just like national parks and sanctuaries have equal sensitive zones nearby,
Hmm.
okay, which is of
Yes,
course,
ma'am.
uh, you know, uh, taken into account by the government, right? Even wetlands should have these eco-sensitive zones.
Eco-sensitive
And
zones.
increasing awareness of these wetlands and migratory birds coming to them among the local community and the stakeholders will definitely help in protecting and conserving these habitats and ultimately the migratory birds coming to these areas every year.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, it was really disheartening to know the detrimental impacts these birds face whenever they have or they whenever they are resting onto the wetland sites. So, ma'am, I'll ask the next question. That is, are there any
Yes. So, a few interesting facts that I personally have seen, witnessed, and even read about are these birds fly at very great heights while migrating. So, I find it very, very intriguing. Like, for example, the gray lag geese, they fly at
Yes,
very high heights, at very high altitudes, right? Which is again, I would say, a physiological feat in itself because flying at such high altitudes require a lot of physiological labor and energy and metabolism that goes into these flights. Another
yes, ma'am.
important aspect that some people might have seen that birds, fly in these V-shaped flocks, right? So
Yes, yes,
when
ma'am.
I was small, I used to wonder how, why they, make this particular shape and fly, right? But now I know,
Yes, ma'am.
since I studied these birds, that is to decrease their air resistance while flying. So there's a lot of physics going into this flight for, flying for such long distances and through these routes, right? One more aspect that I would like to say here is the fastest migrants. If you talk about, I forgot to mention in the last question, snipes. Okay, they are the fastest one when we talk about migrating speeds at which they migrate. Right, so snipes almost fly at 60 meters per hour, right? You can imagine the kind of speed that they have while migrating, right? And they almost migrate for 4,200 miles in one go, right? Then, if you talk about the smallest migrants, I would say hummingbird. Okay, they are also, part of this bird migration as well. So, yeah, that is the smallest species as well. So, yeah, a lot
Ma'am, to
many.
be honest, I'm astonished by knowing like how they are the fastest travelers. So, ma'am, I'll ask you the next question. That is, can you name some of the successful initiatives or the projects that are taken at local, national, or international level to protect these migratory species and the wetlands they thrive upon?
So, I would start with the international ones first, right? So, a lot many initiatives fortunately have been taken on in consideration for protection of these migratory species around wetlands specifically, right?
Hmm.
If you,
Yes,
I don't know if you have heard about, I mean, this is for the laymen who are listening. There was convention or a meeting held in 1971 in Ramsar, a place called as Ramsar, which is in Iran, right? And it is now famously called as the Ramsar Convention, which specifically looked into protection of these uh, sites, right? And
yes,
fortunately, India has now, I mean, India is a party to the Ramsar Convention, and now there are 75 declared Ramsar sites in the country, okay, which hosts these migratory birds each year. Okay, so they have specific criteria and for protection and conservation of these bird species coming to these wetlands. Okay, so that is one. We also have the Convention on Migratory Species, which is actually a program run by the United Nations, right? And the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, if you have heard about, okay, they also promote these restoration activities of wetlands as well. So if you look at the international level, there are lot many huge organizations, okay, coming into picture and helping in conservation. Okay, if you have heard about eBird, okay, eBird is a
Yes,
very good initiative. It is a citizen initiative started by the Cornell Lab, and you can see the website now. Okay, they have so much data from across the globe, right? And even if you happen to go to a water body and or any habitat for that matter, and you spot a few birds, you can straight away put in the list of species that you saw on eBird directly, right? So you
yes,
have direct checklists of birds of specific habitats found at places which are not known to these people from across the globe, right? So I think it's a very, very good citizen initiative that the Cornell Lab has taken over. Of course, there are so many days that are celebrated now at global level. There's,
yes.
like you said, the National Bird Day, right?
National
Then
Birds
we
Day.
also
Yes,
have the World Migratory Bird Day, which comes on May 13th. Then we have
yes.
World Wetlands Day, which will be
Wetland Day.
celebrating pretty soon. That is on 2nd February, right? Every
Yes,
year
ma'am.
we do it.
Yes.
Mhm. If you talk about the Indian scenario, okay, the government fortunately is now, helming the National Action Plan for conservation of migratory birds along the Central Asian flyway. Okay. So
Okay.
here they are looking into the reduction in the decline of population of these migratory birds and protecting these habitats. So how are they going to do that? So they are promoting capacity building. They are taking in the stakeholders of these communities, right? Communication and outreach is being carried out, right? A lot of policymakers are into these aspects of conservation now. So this National Action Plan was launched in 2018 and it went on till 2023. Now there will be a new announcement for the further action plan as well. But it's really heartening to see the government looking into all these smaller aspects of ecosystem which ultimately play a larger role if you look at the whole scenario of ecosystem conservation in our country, right? Habitat conservation
Yes.
and sustainable management of critical habitats. Okay, so their basic this initiative looks into protection of these species, okay, and reversing their decline by 2027. That is the goal, right? So we also
Yes,
have
ma'am.
the national wetland community, committee in the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change who also promotes this, right? So a lot many
Okay.
initiatives at different levels.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for providing such information about the conservation of the wetland and the bird species and how the government is taking initiatives to sensitize and raise awareness about the bird species as to what important aspects they play in our ecosystem. Rightly said, ma'am, that I also believe that conservation, it is not just about conservation of the species, but it is to work with the people together to conserve their habitat in order for us to save the species. So, ma'am,
Absolutely.
I'll go quickly go to the final questions, and then we could go to the questions asked by the audience. So, the final question for today is that, ma'am, are there projects where you have specifically worked on migratory birds of wetlands, and what were the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Okay. So basically, I did my PhD on waders, that are migratory waders, and their feeding habits around the irrigation reservoirs in Vadodara city, right? So our lab was held by the then retired Professor Geeta Parte, and I joined her lab, and they were working on different reservoirs for a long time, right? So Vadhwana was a newly, found irrigation reservoir way back in 2005 when Madam started working. Okay, and
Okay.
consequently, there were different students along with me, my lab mates, who also started working on Vadhwana, and ultimately, we also received a project grant from the Gujarat State Forest Department to work on the
Okay, ma'am.
biodiversity assessment of Vadhwana Reservoir. And thanks to all the efforts from the labs and the bird watching community, Vadhwana is now a Ramsar site. It was declared as a
Oh,
Ramsar site in 2021. Yes. So I am
Okay.
really fortunate to work on a Ramsar site. And a lot many other PhDs also happened there, right? On ducks. I worked on waders. One of my lab mates also worked on the insects, right? So yeah, a lot was done, and of course with the support from the forest department as well, right? The challenges I would say would be number one is funding, because
Okay.
funding is one aspect where any budding researcher like me faces a lot of issues, right? That is one. I
Yes,
won't say
ma'am.
it as it as a challenge, but yes, getting funding is very, very important when we want to do good research, good ethical research,
Yes,
right?
ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
that is one. Then number two is the when we used to go, they were still better roads, but then a lot of problems with the travel and everything, right? So I won't say that it was a challenge, but yeah, now when I look back, we used to enjoy all these journeys to go to fields every 15 days or twice a week sometimes. Because I also
Yes.
worked on the water quality, the physiochemical parameters, right? We also worked on soil quality. We also worked on the vegetation. So there were a lot many aspects, right? And I did my PhD. I mean, I joined in 2008, so that was way back. And during those times, we received a fellowship, which was a very small amount, and we had to fit everything into that small amount of fellowship that we used to get from the university, and it was actually a UGC funded fellowship. And
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, so it's not challenging, it's interesting. If you enjoy your work, if you love what you do, I don't think you would be, yeah, there are going to be a bit of struggles in between, but then if you are determined to do something and achieve something, you can definitely do it.
Yes, ma'am, true. And I totally agree that I could also understand that this is one of your greatest achievements to work on the Ramsar site and look into these birds and learn. I've also, ma'am, been to field during my research on butterflies, and I could totally understand the difficulties one researchers face when they are trying to collect data or to interact with the communities itself, ma'am. So, as I promised, I would like to open the floor to the questions at this point because I believe it is almost the time. Is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers, ma'am? Though, before we go there.
Yeah, I would like to say that do visit these birding spots if you are in Vadodara or in any other state of the country. But make sure that you don't, you know, I mean, I would say we enjoy bird watching. I would, I think every bird watcher who loves bird watching will agree with me that we enjoy the whole, activity. But then,
Yes, ma'am.
unfortunately, sometimes what happens is we take things with us from the city and we go to these areas which are so serene, and we sometimes, as humans, including me, we do a lot of, you know, problematic things. I would say sometimes, waste dumping and
Yes, ma'am.
letting out the leftovers and plastic use and whatnot. I mean, I won't say that it's inevitable, but we can always have a sensitization regarding this, a sympathetic approach
Yes, ma'am.
to these natural surroundings. So everyone one must be going for bird watching. It's really good for health. It's really good for the mind as well, right? So I really enjoy myself, and yeah, if anyone who wants to join us ever, I am always ready for bird watching in the field 24/7. So you can contact me. I'm always present in the Department of Zoology, MS University, Vadodara, and we can plan such visits, and yeah, we can go for bird watching together as well.
Ma'am, it was very important for you to address the situation how there are certain ethics while we are doing bird watching as to not disturb the birds when they are there in their natural habitat and also to take care of the pollution or the waste work which we litter around over there. So that was very good, ma'am, to know. And also, ma'am, I'm pretty sure all of them would like to go for a bird watching with you to learn more about birds and all. Ma'am, just a question from my end that could you recommend some books from where a budding birdwatcher could learn and understand and identify the species?
Yeah. So I myself started with the Birds of the Indian Subcontinent by Grimmett. So it's a very good book. Okay. We also have a book by Salim Ali. So these two
Yes,
books
ma'am.
are the short ways of referring and learning about birds.
Okay, ma'am. So, ma'am, I'll ask the questions that our audience have asked.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, the question is by Meenakshi, ma'am, is that has climate change pushed these best times to observe migratory birds beyond the start of winter?
Um, it's not yet proven through any kind of research, but yes, if you look into the scenario 10 years ago and today, I do feel there is a certain shift in the seasons that we have today, right? So it's currently it is difficult to say whether it is because of climate change or what other aspects are adding up to this. But yes,
Yes, ma'am.
if we look at the observational checklists that we had before and that we have today, I do find a bit of a shift in these seasons as well.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is by Pratiksha Chalke. How can the patterns of migratory bird be studied using any GIS or remote sensing technique?
Yeah. So, if you talk about remote sensing and GIS, it's a very good technology for studying about any species. Okay, be it birds, be it any other animal, right? And it is a boon to the researchers like us and humans for sure, right? So,
Hmm.
nowadays, since the advancement of technology, there has been so much around remote sensing and GIS, this geospatial um, techniques that
Techniques.
we use. Yeah, and there are a lot many different aspects to it, right? So depends on what kind of study you are going to or you are intending to do. Okay. So, say for example, we can track birds directly through radar tracking. That is one of the latest research that I saw, and we can also know landscape features through GIS directly. So we have these hyperspectral satellite data now easily available, right? Of course, some of them you have to purchase. But if you
Okay.
go to QGIS, ArcGIS, these are, QGIS is of course freely available. ArcGIS, you need to have a membership. But
Yes, ma'am.
QGIS is a free platform. We also have the USGS Earth Explorer through which we can directly download satellite data. So again, an
Hmm.
easy way of getting data of any year or any location on the globe, right? So radar tracking is one. We also have tracking through collars or ringings, right? Through which
Hmm.
we can track these bird species. We can also, one of the papers that I recently read was the artificial night at light. Okay, so this is an upcoming aspect of pollution called as light pollution.
Yes, ma'am. Light pollution. I've heard about
Light
this.
pollution, nowadays it has been uh, found that birds use these artificial lights at night as their guiding lights, right? So it's a
Okay.
very, very interesting aspect of how artificial light at night can be a guiding factor for a bird to migrate. So yeah,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
found this interesting.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is by Garima Singh. I have read that flamingos in Gujarat are losing their pink color because of the lack of algae in wetlands. Is it true?
So basically, if you look into the whole aspect of colors in birds, okay,
Hmm.
majority of them have colors which are inherited, but some are like flamingos. They get these colorations through their food. For example,
Yes.
the pink color in flamingos is due to a beta carotene, which is found in the algae. Okay, now flamingos feed on, some fly larvae, some shrimps. Okay, so beta carotene is part of the algae that these shrimps feed on, and ultimately which are fed upon by the flamingos, and that's how the flamingo gets color, indirectly, of course, but yeah, through the food chain itself. So yeah, it's a
Yes,
very,
ma'am.
very interesting question, I would say.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a question by Pushpa Mishra. How individual can contribute to the conservation of migratory bird species?
So the number one aspect of conservation of any migratory bird is to let them be. Okay, make sure you do not disturb these birds in their habitats. I would say that is
Yes,
the most important aspect to any kind of conservation, not only birds, for any animal. Okay, to let them be in their habitats. Okay, uh, do not try to modify or alter their habitats. Do not try to relocate or pluck them out of their habitats and put them elsewhere or something like that. Okay, so the most simple way of answering this question is just let them be, do not disturb them.
yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I believe you have answered this question. I'll just read it out. That is, what role do stopover sites play in the migration journey of birds? You have already answered this, ma'am. So I'll go to the next question. That is, how do migratory birds adapt to different environments during their annual migrations?
Okay, so this is again a very, very important aspect. So, like I said, the migration is a very, very complex mechanism of neuroendocrine roles that their bodies play, right? So when birds move through different types of habitats, they also move through different types of climates, and that's where
Yes,
their hormonal regulation and endocrine system plays a role, right? So it's actually a collaborative effort of their nervous system as well as their endocrine system of detecting these changes and adapting to them as well. So,
yes, ma'am.
and like I said, flow through the same or fly through the same routes. They, a majority of them know how to deal
Yes,
with it.
ma'am. Ma'am, the next question is that by Garima Singh that why migratory birds are dying in India? Numbers have also decreased. Why? That is the question she wants to
Yeah.
know.
So, yeah, I think I answered a part of this in the
Yes.
impact of pollution and a lot many anthropogenic activities that are going on, okay, whether it's urban or rural areas, right? We all know
Yes, ma'am.
that behavior. I mean, while we do anything, we don't what could
Yes, ma'am.
so you have to understand the consequences and be sensitive to these animals and birds around us, right?
Yes.
That is the most easiest way to conserve these species.
Yes, ma'am. And Bhavya has asked a question that what factors influence the migration of these birds? It's the same factor, ma'am, you have discussed in this one.
Yeah.
But
So I have
she
already
wants to
discussed.
know again, ma'am,
Yeah.
if you
So
could answer
majorly
this.
it's yeah. So majorly it is seasonal. Migration is majorly seasonal. If you look into the whole bird physiology, right? For example, if they are in the northern hemisphere where the temperatures go so low that it is very difficult for us to survive. So how the birds will survive, and also the food that they feed on, okay, that also either hibernates or they also migrate, say for example insects, right? So even the food is not found, so they are eventually pushed to migrate to a place where they will find food and of course they will survive, right? So that is the major idea behind migration, bird migration, right? So they go to other places for their own survival.
I hope, Bhavya, this question has been answered. So, ma'am, there's a question by Yash Kanakara. He said that you have defined seasonal migration. So, ma'am, can you define latitudinal and longitudinal migration?
Yeah, I also mentioned about the horizontal and the alternate migratory patterns that we see. So
Yes, ma'am.
altitudinal migration, like I said, for example, if there is a species which resides in the Himalayas, okay, and during winters, like I said, the temperatures go so low that they might have to come down to the lowlands, okay, for better survival. So that is
So,
the altitudinal migration that we talked about, right? Latitudinal and longitudinal always depends on the types of habitats, the type of species of the bird that is going into this latitudinal and longitudinal migration, and also the food. The major aspect of their survival is food and the environment, right? So each of this is playing a role, and that's how the whole aspect comes over. I hope this answers my
okay.
question.
Yes, ma'am. Hopefully, their doubts has been clear. So, ma'am, thank you so much, ma'am, for answering all the questions. I believe that our session is almost over. So, I will have to cease accepting the questions at this time. Chandni ma'am, it was truly a joy to speak with you on behalf of Sustaina Green Teams, and also to understand the impact of the migratory birds and the wetlands and their connection, and also to know about these beautiful migratory species that come to India. Without you, all this session would have not been possible. And we promise that in the upcoming month, we will bring you such amazing sessions as well. To learn about forthcoming sessions, please make sure to subscribe to our channel. And I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Chandni ma'am. Thank you for the audience
Thank you
as
so
well
much.
for joining us. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you.
Yes, yes, ma'am.